Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webinar today, State of Business Messaging 2023. We're really glad to have you. My name is Hannah Clendenin, and I manage our virtual events here at Bandwidth, and I'll be your moderator today. I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. All of your lines are muted to prevent any background noise, so all questions will need to be entered into the Q&A box on your control panel. Don't hesitate to ask anything you may want to know, but we'll reserve questions for our time at the end of the session today. You will also receive a recording link of today's webinar via email in the next few days, so be on the lookout for that. And we have 3 speakers with us on the webinar today. We're excited to have Caitlin Long, Director of Product Management, and Zach Kunkel, Director of Product Marketing here at Bandwidth. And our guest, Gabe Macaluso, Director of Customer Success from Omnisend. And I'm going to pass it off to Caitlin to introduce herself and then the rest of our speakers, and we'll jump into the content for today. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So like Hannah said, I work over the commercial product management piece of our programmable services portfolio. So I'm really focused on our messaging and programmable voice, one of our TC products, and just ensuring go-to-market success for our customers and thinking about how we can extend that success through our commercials. It's really my main reason for being here at Bandwidth. So Zach, maybe why don't you give a little bit more introduction on yourself?
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Zach Kunkel, pronounced like uncle, but with a K in front of it. Glad to be here. I am a director of product marketing, so working a lot with and folks on her team as we think about what are we building for our customers and how are we portraying that to the market. So excited to be here, excited to talk about the state of messaging. Know that this is a huge topic that we continue to talk about. So also excited to have Gabe, a great customer of ours from Omnisend on. So Gabe, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Zach. So my name is Gabe Macaluso. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Omnisend, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what Omnisend does when we get later on. But basically have been in the e-commerce space for about 10 years now and do omnichannel communication. So all things SMS, email, MMS. So yes, we're very excited to partner with Bandwidth and value them and that partnership we have with them as our vendor. And excited to share some insight later on today.
Awesome. Well, great. Hannah, would you mind flipping to the next slide? So if anyone has been to one of these before, we've actually been putting on State of Messaging webinars for the past couple of years. And it's to ensure that leaders like you know how to navigate this changing business messaging landscape. It's tough to keep up. The landscape continues to shift and change. The attendance on this webinar is one proof point of that. People are interested in learning what is the latest and what is going on and how does that impact their business. So thanks for joining us to learn more about this from Bandwidth. So our roadmap for today's conversation is we're going to talk a little bit about why SMS. We're going to talk about what's happening around 10DLC and toll-free within the past couple months. We're going to talk a little bit about what to consider if you might be thinking about going global with your messaging platform or messaging services. And then like we just introduced, we're going to have a conversation with Gabe about Omnisend and how they're approaching SMS as a channel and how it fits into their overall strategy. So we'll jump into why SMS. So it continues to get tougher to navigate business messaging. It is one of the biggest channels that businesses continue to invest in, but as a digital engagement channel for customers, it continues to be cumbersome, to be honest. But what we continue to see, if you flip to the next slide, is people continue to invest in SMS because it gets attention like no other channel does. When you compare it to other channels like email and push notifications, SMS continues to win. When I've looked at different surveys out there to see what is emails, open rates and click-through rates, we continue to see around a 15 to 20% open rate for email. When we look at push notifications within your app or that show up on your phone, varying based on iOS and Android, but a lot of the data continues to show that there's a click-through rate of about 3 to 5%. So when we look at SMS, a lot of data continues to show it's getting around 98% open rates, very quick response times, meaning I, as a customer, am doing what you're asking me to do. If it's reply back to learn more, or click on the link, or confirm my appointment, it's getting the exact business outcome that you, as a business leader or product leader, are trying to drive for yourself or for your customers. And that's proof, again, in the bottom stats as we're looking at why messaging. Again, it's not only driving the engagement and the interaction that we want, but it's ultimately driving business outcomes that you are trying to surface for your customers, whether that's making purchasing decisions or trying to create better customer experiences. It is ultimately doing that for you all. So a little bit on the why SMS, and now we're going to talk a little bit about what has been happening. What are the recent changes? So as we all know, there have been a lot of changes that have happened in the messaging landscape. So we've captured a number of the changes that have happened over the industry in the past couple of years. It's drastically changed from 2016 till now. And while each of these events on the slide is important in and of itself, I really want the big takeaway from this slide to be just that. The messaging industry has changed in a short amount of time very significantly. The three major carriers put programs and procedures around their 10DLC products. With that, new carrier policies came into place, campaign registration processes came into place, new additional fees came into place. The rules around toll-free have changed. The CTIA released best practices for their A2P messaging. And all the while this was happening, you are trying to run your business and you're trying to create the best product to compete in the marketplace, wherever you are, whether it's healthcare, finance, e-commerce, retail, whatever. And what we've heard and what we've seen from you all, from our customers, from our prospects, is that you need to have a partner who's looking out for you and ensuring that you're staying up to date on all things business messaging. Because clearly, if this slide is any indication, there's a lot to stay on top of by yourself. So we're going to jump into some of the most recent changes, and I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin to talk a little bit about three in particular. So our notice for public rulemaking, a little bit around 10DLC, and then a little bit more around toll-free. So Caitlin, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And I think that timeline that you presented is highly relevant, right? Because it shows the rapid evolution of the messaging ecosystem, which it has a high degree. So volume of changes is high and the velocity of changes is high. And there are some really driving factors around that. As we go through the presentation and conversation, really, we're going to talk more about 10DLC, toll-free, and the changing requirements around that. Now the sort of the regulatory conversation that's popped up around it as well. And I think this is it's all good to have context on just the fact that, a couple years ago, we had this notion and this concept of P2P interactions. And those P2P interactions truly are seen by the industry as, me texting you, Zach. And when you're looking at this from our perspective, when we're a business providing services to other business who could then turn around and provide services to other businesses who serve end users, right? Like those A to P interactions where it's a business to business interaction are being treated differently. They have, a higher need for security. There's more likelihood for fraud and abuse. And so that's why you're seeing all of these sort of frameworks pop up to really rein in the usage there. And so we can flip forward. All that context is good to have, right? So we're seeing a lot of changes in the 10DLC space with increased vetting restrictions, and we're seeing a lot of changes in the toll-free space with like the tightening down of the verification process. And so naturally, we're starting to see the government get interested and try and get their arms around what makes sense from a regulatory perspective. And so can proceed to sort of the next slide, where you'll see a different type of timeline, which is the government actually putting forth a notice of proposed rulemaking, an NPRM. You may hear that acronym thrown around, right? And so essentially what this is the FCC saying, hey, we're thinking about making a law. What do we think about it? Like, what does everybody have to say? And inviting commentary on it, inviting discourse, public discourse. It's open, it's on the record. There's room for commentary. You can see the timeline here where the FCC did announce in October of 2021 that it would sort of conduct this robotexting rulemaking process, and has since started the process of actually issuing thoughts and then inviting commentary and responses. I wanted to really make a point to mention this, because it is something that is actively going on right now. I mean, there is an active discussion happening with regards to the industry, the ecosystem, and the actual regulatory body that we operate in, which is the FCC. And so if this is something that you want to get more engaged in or involved in, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it is not finalized. There was an update on March of this year, so 2023, where the FCC has continued the process, has really issued and reported on this reasonable D&O list, and invited more comments on the notice of proposed rulemaking. So that's the FNPRM. So it's a further notice of proposed rulemaking. So comments there, additional comments if you are already engaged, or if you're not, they're due by May the 8th rather. And then replies due by June the 6th. Now, we want to flip forward. Why am I telling you all this? I want everybody to be aware and educated that this is going on, and that what these rules wind up being will affect the space that we as partners, customers, provider interact in. And so it's something that I would encourage everyone here to get opinionated about and understand, how the groups, maybe industry groups that you are a part of that are potentially actively involved in this discourse and responding. I would encourage you to understand what that message is. If you have questions about that, we can certainly have conversations, make ourselves available to help you understand how bandwidth is responding, and then our position as a whole, and also encourage you to just engage your own counsel, or potentially engage those industry groups that you're a part of that are likely a part of the response process thus far. And so I wanted to lead off with this, because this is really setting the tone and feeds off of the changes that we're seeing in the ecosystem that we'll go through now, starting with 10DLC, which we talked a little bit about. And 10DLC, for those that are not as familiar, maybe newer to the space, right? This concept of 10DLC came up when we moved from those P2P or peer-to-peer interactions to that stronger concept of an A2P, or an application to person channel. So the more business to business interactions. And in order to wrap a framework around it, this notion of 10-digit long code, or really just like that local experience where you're interacting in a branded consumer engagement experiential way on a more localized conversation channel. So let's talk about some of the different changes that have happened in the last few months. Flip forward. Click. Cool. Too far. Going too far. Okay, 10DLC campaign vetting. So this was new as of this year. We were communicating to you customers, the market, sort of as soon as we had our information, what this would look like. But at the beginning of this year, there were some changes in TCR that prevented that auto accept feature for the secondary DCA, which is your direct connected aggregator, which yes, right? And so now when you're actually submitting for registration for your 10DLC campaigns, those numbers and that campaign needs to go through this vetting process. And really the purpose of the vetting process is to ensure the higher integrity of the campaign and to ensure that the content of that campaign actually matches up to the brief and information that's being submitted. That process is an actual manual review process. So the 10DLC campaigns are placed into a pending status while they are going through that vetting process. And then once that vetting process is complete, then you push through the rest of the registration process. This is where the $15 per vetting event charge entered in, which we did communicate to customers as well. Again, happy to answer questions on that, but the reason for that is really sort of that manual review process. And we're encouraging the higher integrity submissions because we do see this $15 charge on each individual vetting event that occurs. The other thing to note here is that the TNs won't be able to be associated with the campaign until it's actually fully approved. And so the reason being there is that we want to ensure the business continuity and the experience of the actual sending. And so if there is a TN that's associated with the campaign, there is a carrier that blocks traffic on campaigns that are not actually approved from the TN association perspective. So just protecting our customers from the experience of being blocked by any individual carrier with that process. I'll pause, and then again, questions at the end is something that, so if you have questions, please submit them throughout because we'll definitely be taking Q&A at the end. Just pause to digest. I don't know, Zach, if you'd add anything there. We're going to go through the fees in a minute, but any other comments?
I think you did a good job covering it. I think just for our customers joining on the call, like Caitlin did a great job overviewing it, and this was new for all of us. And so as we have gotten up to speed and are starting to navigate, we are continuing to see improvement on this process and how can we give the product and the platform that you need and that we need to navigate the industry together. So always open to feedback. We want it, we need it to create a better experience for you all, but no comments on the actual display or going around with the vetting process.
Yeah, and that's a really good call out. I mean, this is something that we're with you in navigating the volume and velocity of changes, and so we want to hear the frustrations and we want to hear your successes and we want to hear what's working and what's not. That is important to us. With that said, if we want to flip forward to the next slide, we have also seen on the 10DLC side, in particular, the unregistered traffic price increasing. And so we did anticipate this was going to be a mechanism that the industry uses to incentivize registered traffic and disincentivize unregistered traffic. I don't see this as something that will stop. So I think that this will be something that you can expect to see in the future, where this unregistered traffic is just charged and taxed at a much higher rate, if you will. Starting specifically with AT&T on June the 1st, they are increasing the surcharges on that unregistered traffic to the percent increase that you see down here in the corner. And so I think that it's incredibly business impactful. If you have unregistered traffic, it's yet another incentive to actually register your traffic. And there's one takeaway here from what we've been talking about. It's, the ecosystem, the industry as a whole, the government is really pushing towards mechanisms and systems and processes that would get us closer to that KYC or know your customer. And you'll see the best practices and the processes continue to evolve around that. if you want to flip forward, I mean, it's just for the betterment of your business, we really do recommend registering your 10DLC traffic. Bandwidth did take a stance on this at the end of last year and communicated that we would be requiring registration for our 10DLC traffic. That said, we've been working with customers because we understand that this is a business disruption. I mean, being able to pay the fees, build in the tools into your development platforms to be able to actually collect that information, build into the new cost models, the structure of the vetting fees to be able to properly register all of your campaigns. It's something that takes time for some of your businesses. And so we've actively been working with customers to provide the grace, to provide the time in order to be able to get up to speed with that 10DLC registration push. So cool. Let's flip forward and talk a little bit about toll-free. I want to make sure we have lots of good time to talk about customer use cases at the end. So toll-free, and we can just go ahead and flip forward into the next slide. This is just another channel that we see in the messaging space where we're able to provide, high volume branded conversations at scale for that branded customer engagement, and I would say maybe less changes than we've seen in the 10DLC space on toll-free verification comparatively in the last 6 months, but we've still seen some changes and updates here, right? So effective actually earlier this month, the industry's toll-free aggregator, that toll-free aggregator has implemented new limits and restrictions to how you can send. And so previously there just weren't the same type of restrictions on actual volume metric sending limitations for restricted and pending numbers. And that has now been implemented. And so what that means is that if you have not submitted your toll-free number for verification, or if you are sitting in pending and waiting for that verification to pass, then you'll be subject to these additional restrictions. It's something that we want to make sure that everybody's aware of, because obviously as you're planning, how you're enabling your customers, it's just something that you want to consider on throughput when you're turning on new campaigns or with your toll-free numbers specifically.
Yeah, and Caitlin, just to add something there, I think restricted and pending, they might be intuitive to some, but just to talk a little bit more about that for anyone who's like, I don't know what that means. Restricted is a fancy way of saying you either haven't submitted for toll-free verification or you were denied. At the end of the day, it means you are not pending and you have not been approved or verified. Pending just means you are awaiting the feedback from the aggregator, from the carriers. And then obviously verified, approved, that is the green state. So just in case anyone has questions about what do those mean, that's the change, and that's what it means.
Yeah, thanks for that call out. I actually have that on verification in my own notes app on my computer and have to refer to it quite frequently. So it's a great call out. Cool. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything on to that, but those are the main changes that we're seeing. And I think, again, the macro level takeaway here is that in all of the channels, so toll-free, 10DLC, we've already seen this transpire with short codes, right? Short codes are very, very tightly locked down. There's a very strict campaign brief process, and we're just seeing those toll-free channels and the 10DLC channels start to move in the same direction. And you're seeing all those restrictions being placed upon those channels so that we can get closer to that know your customer, so that we can have that higher integrity traffic. And you're seeing that reflected in the regulatory space as well. So I think those are the sort of the macro trends with the individual details. And I think that we'll send this deck out after, Hannah. I think so. So you can have more of the information at your fingertips later. So Zach,
we'll have the recording after, yeah.
Yeah, we are. Okay, cool. Zach, I know we want to talk a little bit about global messaging. So we've talked a lot about the industry and the ecosystem. And then I think it would be a good transition to just talk a little bit about what Bandwidth's doing there.
Totally. Yep. So as Caitlin just hit on, a lot of what we've been talking about is very specific to the United States, right? So the texting ecosystem and A2P specifically in the US. But we're going to talk a little bit and shift gears when we talk about global messaging. So if you are a part of a company, or if you have ever been a part of a company anywhere, as you think about growth plans and where you want to go, it almost always comes back to, when do we want to go global? Is our offering, is our solution a global problem that people might need help solving outside of the United States or outside of Canada? We're very specific on that because that's where we are headquartered and operating in. But global messaging can expand your communications to your customers, right? So a lot of data out there, and a lot of it shows that about 92% of the world's population has a smartphone, has a phone that can connect to the internet, that can have data. And so therefore, the best way to get in touch with mobile subscribers or potential customers or patients or anything, the way you may be able to refer to your customers, the best way to do that is actually via SMS. But there are a few things to consider first. So if we flip to that next slide, the United States ecosystem around messaging is super complicated, but there's a lot less cohesion when you think about messaging globally. It depends on the country, it depends on the use case, depends on the number type or sender, alphanumeric sender ID that you want to use. So just wanted to hit on a couple of considerations to think of first. So first and foremost, what is your use case? What are you trying to do? And how will you be using the SMS? Is it to deliver notifications? Maybe it's one-time passwords, two-factor authentication. Maybe it's you want to market a product or service, or maybe you want to have these two-way conversations for support use cases or anything like that. This is going to be the most important thing to think about as we think about these next few considerations. But first, what do you want to do, right? Next thing is country and registration requirements. So some countries have very specific requirements to get up and running with A2P texting. Almost all of them do. And it's figuring out what are those requirements and are you able to meet them? Or do you have someone who can help you meet them? So as an example, a number of countries like Australia, Israel, and others, they require pre-registration if you're going to utilize alphanumeric senders. It even gets more complex if you're trying to use local numbers, mobile numbers within country. There are additional considerations that you need to think about and that you need to talk with your provider about. And then last, as we think about the use case, the country you want to be, what the requirements are, there are other channels out there, right? So SMS is what we're specifically talking about right now. But as a business, you need to think about which communication channel actually would be the best and easiest way for me to reach my customers. So maybe your business needs SMS and that's all it needs. Or maybe you need to combine over-the-top applications like a WhatsApp with the capability of SMS as a fallback if that customer doesn't actually have WhatsApp or is using WhatsApp. So all that to consider as you go global. It's not just as easy as saying we need to go global. I'm sure everyone knows that on the call. But whatever the decision you are making and whatever your growth plans are, thinking through these considerations with someone, and even better, making sure you have knowledgeable answers or a partner or a plan that can help you think through that to navigate this complexity is a great recommendation that we would have. So whole question, would love to see how many of you all are actually looking to expand your messaging services globally within the next 12 months? I think I saw that it launched, and I'm assuming it did. Oh, it looks like it closed, Hannah, so I don't know if we can open it back up.
Let's see. Sorry, everyone. Let's see if I could.
So yeah, very much just want to understand, is this a part of your growth plan? Are you looking to go global? Or are you not? I just lost it again. I don't know if...
I think it closed. Apologies for that. I think I double clicked it. and it won't let me relaunch it. So sorry.
All good. Third time's a charm. We're good. So again, same poll question. Would love to see some responses, and we'll give it another 10 seconds before we jump into our conversation with Gabe. Oh,
I'm going to go ahead and hide the result, Zach.
okay. Got it.
Sorry about that.
Whenever I thought we were still asking for, there we go. We're all good.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to jump into our conversation with Gabe. So Gabe, thanks for listening to us drone on for a little bit. Everyone is here to hear from someone like them, right? Someone who is a business leader who is trying to get to market and utilize SMS as a channel to engage their customers. So happy to have you on, and happy to have Omnisend be a great customer and partner with Bandwidth. And so wanted to start first and foremost with you explaining what actually does Omnisend do, and maybe tell us a little bit about who are you targeting, who's your ideal customer, and what problems are you helping them solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So Omnisend is a multi-channel marketing platform. So we were built like 8 years ago, primarily using email as a primary communication channel. And then we've expanded into SMS and web push notifications. We primarily work with e-commerce brands, sort of like your D2C brands out there. Anything from, flip-flops to nutritional powders to high-end clothing. And we work kind of like all across industries. So we focus in e-commerce, but we've got, customers in all sorts of verticals utilizing us to automate their SMS and email marketing sentence. And they can combine those in one sort of automation or one sort of campaign. So the goal of communicating with your customers, no matter what their preferred form of communication is.
Love it. Awesome. And I'm sure people are listening and thinking that's pretty similar to my business or exactly kind of what we're trying to do. So I think this will be a great conversation. So Gabe, obviously Omnisend has been a customer of Bandwidth for a few years. And so would love to start just from the beginning. So flashback a couple of years, what business issue were you experiencing, or what was the business experiencing that made someone say, man, we need to look around and see if there's something better to solve or whatever the case may be? What were you guys looking
at? Yeah, great. Yeah, there's obviously, this is a multifaceted conversation or multifaceted answer, if you will. So a couple things happening. Obviously, there was COVID taking place, and that was a boom for e-commerce. And so that in turn allowed us to grow rapidly. We are a bootstrapped, organically funded company. And so we were experiencing rapid growth. I've been with Omnisend a little over 3 years and was employee like 30, 40. And now we're north of almost 200 employees. So we've just grown rapidly. We've quadrupled our revenue. So a lot of cool things have been happening. And so when we look at scaling, and Bandwidth was able to provide the numbers for me, just in the last year alone, we literally almost tripled our SMS and MMS sending volume. So well north of hundreds of millions of messages coming out of our system with all of our customers. So we started evaluating who can we partner with? Scalability was obviously huge for us in terms of, okay, who can actually scale with this volume that we're going with? And we're already seeing, as we go through the first quarter in 2023, another exponential growth as people are adopting SMS and MMS messaging as an essential part of their communication strategy with their customers. And so Bandwidth has been there with us, kind of every step of the way, starting at the very beginning of okay, this is what your onboarding is going to look like. This is how we're going to grow and scale with you. And then we're going to be that trusted advisor. So all the same things that I've seen in the questions coming in and asking, and dealing with toll-free verification of, hey, there's this thing kind of toll-free verification. Let's beta test and kind of go through this process. And it was kind of cute because you'd have one customer here, one customer there. So now, I should have asked for those numbers, but my guess is there's probably hundreds of toll-free verifications coming from us to Bandwidth, which I'm sure they just adore. Because when we started this process, it was a manual process, and their team, I think, was sitting somewhere, and now we're working with these aggregators. And no matter what provider you go to, it's this now 4 to 6 week of just I want to be able to send this campaign. I want to get it out the door now. And so we're constantly dealing with that. And Bandwidth has been phenomenal and kind of just, working with us and being hand in hand with us on that process.
Love it. Thanks for that. And Gabe did plug it, but continue to submit all your questions. We've got some time at the end. So Gabe, you kind of hit on this, but would love to hear maybe a little bit more of, you guys jumped on board a couple of years ago. How would you say there's a difference between what we tell you and what you experience with any process, right? With any product, with any service. How has the partnership been with Bandwidth and Omnisend since making that switch?
Yeah, and I promise I'm not being paid for these answers. Like, there's no discount on the agreement or contract. And I'm a customer success, like I lead customer success. So, there's always that kind of joke between like, okay, sales is going to sell and they're going to tell the customer like whatever they want to hear. And customer success, we have to be the bearers of reality and be like, well, I don't know why that salesperson told you this. So I'm speaking with candor and honesty as much as I possibly can. That being said, like, Bandwidth really does give us the opportunity to engage with them. And we absolutely challenge not only what their product's capable of, but we challenge their knowledge, we challenge their legal team, we challenge the compliance organization, and they continue to meet every kind of challenge we present them with, in terms of not only are they coming with, a solution to maybe our problem that we're working through, but they're willing to work with us on it. And if it's something that we don't have an understanding of, you guys are extremely fantastic in terms of, okay, let's explain why this is the way it is, and this is the way we have to do it. And for me, that's like huge, especially being on the customer success side of like, if you can really kind of get the customer to understand the why, then it makes it way easier for us to kind of continue to partner and continue to grow with Bandwidth.
Love it. So kind of switching gears, but obviously we're really focused on SMS here, but full well know that Omnisend, I mean, it's in your business name, right? Omni. So that's not just messaging. What other channels are you offering, and how are you guiding customers to leverage messaging alongside of those other channels? Like, how is that education and process going for you all?
Yeah, I get it. I'll probably geek out a little bit about this because this is where I get really excited, because this is like my pedigree. So, the idea being like, okay, so you have an email, right? And like every year people are like, email's dead, right? That's moving on. SMS is like this new like sexy way to communicate, right? But now like you have to be careful with SMS and MMS, because yes, it's a great way to communicate. Zach showed the stats of how quickly people engage with it, how quickly people respond. There are those people who have the unread email icon on their iPhones, and there are the people that don't. Very rarely will you find someone who has unread messages. Like that bubble, for whatever reason, people can't get behind leading. So, but that being said, like it's growing so exponentially that we have to be careful that it doesn't just become this other channel to ignore, right? And in the industry that I work in, like with sending emails for e-commerce company, like when I talk to my older relatives or whatever, they're like, oh, you spam people. And it's like, well, no, we don't spam people. Like you go through all the process of making sure that people are opting in properly. And that's extremely important with SMS. That's why verification is becoming this big thing, because we want to make sure that we protect the good senders and we keep the bad people out, right? Like we don't want them to abuse that. So as we kind of see this trend in growth, like email is still going to be your bread and butter. It's your biggest ROI. It's the least expensive. That's no secret. And SMS really should, for me, like the way I guide my customers and the way we kind of talk to our clients, it's about being a much more intimate way of communicating. And that's where we're seeing like this rise to like, how are people communicating two-way? And we can get into like a whole nother trend of like, how does Chat GPT play into this, and like artificial intelligence in terms of like, are you actually texting back and forth with a real human, or is this like a bot that you're chatting with? And like those bots have come so far in terms of actually engaging with you versus just being like, listen, I know I'm talking to a robot. Like, please let me talk to a human. That all to be said, like when we get into like this idea of how do we actually build this personal relationship through communication, and you can do it like just outbound, right? Outbound's the easiest way because you put it out there and no one's expecting you to respond, but you can absolutely tell a story and create an experience. whether you're combining those channels. So, if you come to my website and you sign up, I'm going to send you an email that's like, hey, here's your 50% off. This is what makes our brand so great. Then in Omnisend, I can set it up to be like, okay, let's wait a day. And like, did Zach convert or did Kaylin convert off this email? They haven't converted yet. They haven't made that purchase. Okay, so I'm going to send them a text message if they opted in and say, hey, don't forget you've got this discount that's about to expire. Make sure you complete your purchase, or, here's a QR code to redeem in store, right? And like QR codes, right? Like those were like really hip and then they weren't. Now they're all back again. Like COVID brought QR codes back. Who would have thought? But when you get into like this two-way communication, see, I told you I was going to geek out on this. I was going to get really passionate about this.
I love it. The passion is there.
So when you get to like the two-way concept, like the biggest mistake I see people do is they're like, hey, contact us on our website. We're here. We can chat with you. Text us back. We'll reply. If you don't have somebody supporting that role to actually text someone back, there is no worse experience than being like, text someone and they're like, hey, we got your text. We'll email you within 24 to 48 hours. It's like, it's immediately deflating because people want to text in because they want that immediate result. Flip to a different story. Like I got on my daughter's orthodontics website. Like she's going to orthodontist, getting braces. There was a question about her bill. It says, text us. We'll get back to you. And like people don't like talking on the phone. So I'm like, this is perfect. I'm going to text. I'm already thinking like, they're going to send me an email. They're going to call me to talk through it. And sure enough, they texted me back. And like the entire situation was resolved in like 15 minutes. And I was like, this is how this is supposed to work. So kudos to Charleston Orthodontics. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. They understand how to do it with two-way texting. So if you need an example, that's a good one to go. But again, you have to have that supported channel. Like don't set something up that you can't support.
Yep. Love it. So big takeaways. 1, QR codes are back.
Yeah.
2, SMS. I agree, Gabe. When we look at that first slide, I mean, there are a lot of efforts being done to make sure SMS continues to be that highly sought channel, but it's not the right channel for every sort of communication. And so understanding what are your customers really trying to do and what's the use case they're trying to solve with messaging or with other channels, and then figuring out how those play alongside whatever it is that you're offering. So Gabe, you've kind of mentioned this, but obviously our relationship is Bandwidth is selling B2B. You are then also selling B2B. And so this industry can be complex. There are a lot of best practices that we're trying to educate you all on, and then that you're trying to educate your customers on. And so would love to hear, how do you actually educate your customers on those best practices or guidelines like the acronym SHAFT? Anything there that you think is worth passing along to our attendees?
Yeah, because at this point, I feel like you might need a master's degree in some of this stuff. And then, of course, like defining what's law and what's best practice guidelines from a professional trade group. And like, do you actually have to follow those things? And then, our headquarters is actually in Europe. So we're a global company. We support companies in, I can't remember how many different countries, but it's like north of 100 now. And we have 80,000 installs. So we're working with people all around the world in terms of managing all of this compliance. And again, guidelines of best practices and laws. And then you can even get into like the specifics where Florida has like this new like mini TCPA law that's like, if you're sending a text out, does the number need to be reachable? But that's only if you don't identify yourself. So it's like all these like weird, quirky little things where it's like, oh, if I say, hey, I'm Omnisend and I'm texting you and it's very clear who I am, the number doesn't have to be reachable. But I'm not a lawyer, so this is based on my knowledge. So please consult with your own legal advice to make sure that it's compliant. But that's kind of how we've interpreted. So we have to pass all this information along as best as we possibly can. So we do the same thing Pinwith does, right? We do webinars, we do best practice guidelines, we write blog posts, we educate our support team, our sales team, our customer success team, and just try to provide the best guidance we can to our customers, because it's no easy task.
Yep. And it sounds like, and what I know of you want that dialogue with your customers as well. And so I think a key takeaway for everyone on this call is messaging industry by now it's consistently changing, right? And so having that open dialogue with your customers and having that relationship be built consistently time and time again is probably something hugely important for Bandwidth and for Omnisend. So Gabe, last question I have for you, but would love to hear, what trends are you seeing from your customers as they go out and engage with their customers, with brands, all that stuff? What are you tending to see on the back end, or any insights that you're finding?
Yeah, so and I think the biggest thing is, just the volume of SMS and MMS that's going out. Like I mentioned, we're already seeing like a pretty good increase, like probably about like 50% year over year. Obviously, some of our business is seasonality, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, those are going to be big holiday sending season. That's when everyone wants to send messages. We're seeing, I feel like the delays in toll-free verification are starting to grow a little bit because of this backlog, because more and more people want to get into that experiment with the idea of how do I communicate on this more personal level. And then I think, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention ChatGPT. We've already started implementing some of that automated intelligence in like writing copy. So like, product descriptions, write me an email that best conveys the sale that I want to have on my website. And that's built into our editor. So all of those types of things, I think is kind of where we're going, because I did a webinar earlier this year and my theme for 2023 was like, we kind of talk about like being lazy in email marketing or being lazy in marketing in general. But the idea being like, we spent the last couple of years through COVID, like kind of taking a step back and kind of really kind of narrowing our focus in terms of, okay, what actually works in terms of like content creation, copywriting, reviewing our blogs, doing all that kind of stuff. I feel like a lot of companies did that kind of stuff. And so you have this like large library of stuff that you can repurpose and reuse. And so it's not about like recreating the wheel to like connect with your customers. It's like, okay, I did all this testing, I did all this stuff, I have all this content, what worked and what can I reuse quickly and efficiently so that I can do less work but make more money.
Love it. Gabe, thanks so much for joining us, and appreciate this conversation. We have got about 10 minutes from my watch to do questions. So just as a high level point, there have been a ton of questions. We're not going to have nearly enough time to do them all justice. If we don't get to your question, please make sure that you route it to us, whether it's through your customer success manager or your contact into Bandwidth. Make sure that you send those, and we'll make sure that they get to the proper channel to answer them.
Yeah, and Zach, what I was actually going to say is we can. There are a lot, and while y'all have been talking, I've been trying to pull a list so that we have ones to respond to, boom, 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 as soon as possible. But I would actually propose that we can follow up. We'll take the proactivity to just make sure that we engage the right folks internally and then get those questions answered. As long as you've provided your contact information within your registration, I think that that's something that we can easily do. But I figured, and I'm not trying to jump the gun, but I did see a couple come in for Gabe, you specifically. So since we were talking about Omnisend, I maybe wanted to just start with those. And we had a question from Aaron, and then actually another asked a similar question: is how are you handling the timing gap with new customers needing to wait as long as potentially 14 weeks until with Omnisend? Hard to do with the date.
A lot of begging and a lot of niceties and a lot of like, hey, we get it. Like, this is just the state that we're in right now. And so sometimes it's working, especially like in our industry where like we obviously have net new customers that have built a new e-commerce site and they're kind of building from scratch. That's a little bit easier of a conversation to have in terms of like, okay, this is where you can focus your other efforts on in terms of as you're implementing and onboarding with us. We have a customer coming from another provider and they have an existing SMS kind of program in place. Some of it's just kind of working in that transition of like, okay, like let's downgrade your plan over here, keep that going there. And then as soon as we get the new number set up and going, we can get it. And of course, like, because that pending verification, it does allow some limits and some flexibility. Like we focus on, making sure SMS are live and optimized in their automation. So abandoned cart, welcome automations, abandoned browse, sort of like the money makers that have the highest ROI. And then obviously hopefully that is enough time to then be ready for the campaigns after that 4 to 6 week timeline. But everyone's in the same boat. So it's one of those situations where it's like, yeah, this is unfortunate, but we all have to work together on this.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And then just another for Omnisend was, do you work with the SMS aggregator directly to get numbers verified, or do you go through Bandwidth for all your toll-free verifications?
Yep. So all of our toll-free verifications go with Bandwidth. We work with them directly on it, and then they're fantastic. So if something gets delayed or we want an escalation, we reach out to them, and then they basically do the same thing we have to tell our customers, where it's like 4 to 6 weeks, guys, you know that. So we're working on it, but there's nothing we can really do to push it faster.
Yeah, and I mean, if obviously something happens, we can get involved, and there's our support process for that. But good call out on that one. We had another one come in, a general question on HIPAA compliance. I thought this was a good one for just the group. And Zach, feel free to jump in on this one, or whoever. But I'm assuming that's just two-way texting is great, but how do you handle regulations such as HIPAA? My experience is that texting is not really HIPAA compliant. I don't know that one, but I'd open it up to the group.
Happy to give my take, and then Kayla and Gabe, if you have anything you want to add. So agree, Nick. Texting was not designed to handle protected health information. In the ecosystem, Bandwidth is not a covered entity. I'll take a step back. This is not legal advice. That's my disclaimer, and I'm not a lawyer. But Bandwidth is not a covered entity as seen by HIPAA. But Nick, what we have seen is that people can enter BAAs or business associate agreements with their texting provider or with their communication channel provider to actually enable and enhance those patient experiences that are exchanging protected health information. So that is Bandwidth's answer to that question. Agree, there is some risk and liability inherently baked into that. And that's a big part of what we do with our BAA is, for lack of all explanation, it is an additional insurance policy that says if something were to happen, and what's in it beside you, Mr. Customer. So,
yeah, and I can chime in here too, because this may be related to the orthodontic kind of question scenario I brought up. And I will tell you, they did a good job of, I think this is anything with sort of personally identifiable information, right? So anytime you're going to be communicating with someone with SMS, it would be hard to validate that this person is actually who they say they are, right? So you would want to be careful with that as a business owner in any concept there. So they confirmed my email address and then sent emails to me that way. And so that was where the confidential information came in and how they log in through a patient portal. But I think in any industry you're working through, whether it's you're working in real estate and you're confirming details of a transaction, SMS is definitely a way to kind of raise your hand, but then taking it to the appropriate channels so that you are compliant is extremely important.
Yep. That makes total sense. It's a risk tolerance thing, right? It's an insurance policy essentially if you're looking to secure the HIPAA compliance on that channel. So well said. We did have earlier questions that came in, so we're going back to the beginning to just hit a couple of ones that I saw come through that seemed to be a bit of a theme. We did have a couple of questions around the vetting fee specifically, whether or not those were consistent and whether it was with your Bandwidth specifically. So just context on that. So that $15 vetting fee that's associated with ensuring that your 10DLC campaigns can be vetted and then subsequently fully registered. That fee is a fee implemented by the largest aggregator in the industry, and Bandwidth uses that aggregator. And so in those places where we need to pass that fee on, that's where that fee is coming from. So not Bandwidth specific in that sense, but wanted to touch on that specifically. Let's see. We also had a good question from, let me see, I have to go scroll back up. On the toll-free vetting process and the 10DLC vetting process and registration and toll-free verification. We had a couple of questions on this one as well. One of them specifically from Alexander, and the processes are different, so they're separate. Registration, think 10DLC. Vetting is a part of the registration process, also 10DLC, and then the verification process for toll-free is separate. And so they're two separate processes. They have sort of the macro level themes are the same, but they're two separate processes and carry with them separate fees, separate restrictions. The actual messaging channel themselves, similarly, are different in that nature, and so those are unique experiences. The other one maybe to just touch on is let's see, we had some good feedback. Toll-free verification API. That was the one I also wanted to hit on, had a question on that one. So we do have a toll-free verification API in beta currently. And so if you are a current customer and you are interested in that toll-free verification API, please let your account manager or your CSM know. If you're not a customer, let us know. That is something that we're actively working to get to a scaled product. We actually have one of our largest customers on that beta right now. And so we're doing all of the stabilization necessary to open that up to general availability. And then Hannah, I know we had a couple more questions. If you want to touch on those, I just wanted to make sure and hit some of those highlights.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Caitlin. And I think, Gabe, you actually touched on this in one of your questions, but how do we plan for seasonality like Black Friday, Cyber Monday with capacity management?
Yeah, so I think this is a great opportunity to kind of highlight the relationship we have with Bandwidth. So we meet regularly and we have those conversations in terms of like, hey, what are we planning? So I know you guys can up the bandwidth, unintended, to be able to get those throughput through the messages out. And then of course, if you have not verified your number, like do it now, like today, like go ahead and submit that process. Make sure your opt-in is very clear and explicit. Make sure that your sample campaigns are very clear and explicit of what you're doing. And then Zach mentioned it before, like Shaft, just be aware of that, especially in the US. So that's sex, hate, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Those are prohibited from marketing through SMS. And like, we can kind of even get into like the nitty gritty of it, of like CBD and those types of protected substances. Like the verification process will even check backlinks. So even if you get verified and then you send those SMS with content, like we alerted all of our customers, like, hey, we know it's 420, but like if your campaigns include 420, hemp, CBD, even if you don't sell those things, but you just kind of want to celebrate in Weed Day, like that's enough to get you blocked because they're just looking for keywords and key terms. So you just have to be mindful of those types of things. So that's a really long-winded answer for getting verified today, but I think it's important.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And we are at time. So like Caitlin said, we have a ton of questions, but we will follow up with you all after the webinar. I just want to hit a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, I want to thank our speakers, Caitlin, Gabe, and Zach, for joining us on the webinar today. And thank you for your time as well. We really appreciate it. And then I've seen a couple questions about the recording for this webinar that will be available in the next 24 business hours on our website. You'll be able to see the recording there. It'll also be emailed to you in the next few business days to whatever email you use to register for this webinar. So again, we hope you enjoyed this time and we got to answer some questions. We will follow up with you all and appreciate your time and hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. See ya.
Yeah.